The face on my bedroom wall. The line bordering the other side of sanity is only the width of a shadow. All you have to do is move to a different angle to watch it disappear. I am a man of particular taste. My alarm is set at 6:28 a.m. because 6:30 doesn't give me enough time to massage the salt into my morning egg. I carry with me a list of my favorite words and check them off throughout the day to avoid redundancies. And you will never catch me throwing my clothes in a pile at the day's end, because I find it uncomfortable leaving undressed mannequins in my room. I'd oblige you not to picture some tormented scene. It's really quite a civilized way to store your outfits. I even made them plastic masks by boiling down some old toys and shaping them with a scalpel so they look perfectly natural there. Things must be just so. If they are not so, then I am not so. My wristwatch broke once, and I didn't leave work until 3 in the morning. I physically hurt trying to tear myself away while it only read 4:52 p.m. I am telling you this because I want you to understand how orderly my routine is, and how shocked I was to see something so egregiously, check off, out of place. 3 weeks ago I walked into my apartment and placed my hat on the garden gnome which stood sentry at my front door. I drank a glass of water which I had left on the kitchen counter that morning to rehydrate me from my walk home. I trust the public transit as much as a toddler with a gun. Then to my bedroom, where I found them. 2 faces were mounted on the wall astride my bed, that of the bus driver, and another of Elaine who lived next door. The bus driver displayed a crafty grin, while Elaine was transfixed with the most preposterous, check-off, sneer I had ever seen in my life. She was an angel in an apron, benevolent to the bone. I've never seen her wear such a dreadful expression in all my time with her. Bet you feel silly now, the bus driver said. I beg your pardon? I was shocked, but not so shocked as to forget my manners. Not trusting the bus. How does it feel knowing I got in safe and she didn't? What happened to you, Elaine? Her twisted sneer remained static, her dead plastic eyes completely devoid of life. I touched her face, and then the face of the bus driver. Both were made of plastic, much like those on my mannequins. Peculiar to say the least, considering I never made faces to resemble either of those people. I must say I rather liked them there though. Now that they were pointed at the mannequins, the faces could keep each other company while I was gone. 2 weeks ago Elaine is dead. I believe that's the most important fact to address first. She struck her head on a concrete pillar after tumbling down nearly 2 flights of stairs. I never saw her, but the landlady was kind enough to show me pictures she snapped with her cell phone. She shows me all the strangest things. I suppose she doesn't think I judge her because of my own eccentric tastes. She's wrong, but I wouldn't say it to her face. Elaine's grotesque sneer was identical to the mask above my bed. I believe that to be the second most important fact. I didn't volunteer this information to anyone at the time, but I am disclosing it to you because I find it easier to trust people when I am not looking them in the eye. There's another mask above my bed, although perhaps this is the most important fact of all. The smiling face of my landlady. I believe I understand why she is smiling, because the bus driver now looks absolutely terrified. What are you so scared of? I asked him, but now his expression was fixed. You'll see, the landlady said, grinning from ear to ear. 1 week ago her comment was germane, check off, to the news the following week. The bus was clipped by a drunk driver and sent rolling down a hillside. 2 casualties, one of which was the driver himself. I can only imagine how horrendous it would be to roll down the hill amidst a blender of falling bodies and flailing limbs. Of course, I don't have to imagine how they reacted to the situation, because I could see it plainly on the driver's face. It is with deep trepidation that I must report my latest discovery. My own face has been added to the wall, and while the landlady's mask doesn't seem the least perturbed, my own expression surpasses the most ghastly countenance of dread your darkest imagination might conjure. I tried to shift my anguished face, but the expression was hard set and immovable. I tried heating it in the oven to make it malleable, but 2 hours at 500 degrees didn't make the slightest indentation. All it did was make the landlady giggle from above my bed. "You can't change it. You're done for." "You'll see," I replied. I went to knock upon the landlady's door. It seemed like a fairly straightforward fix. Once her real face matched the mask of terror I saw on my own, then my face would be able to smile again. She opened the door and invited me in. I let her serve me tea and introduce both of her cats in a sing-song voice as though they were the one talking. "And they call me the crazy one." I considered waiting for her back to be turned, but I had to make sure the expression really captured her impending disaster. It wasn't as easy or as pretty this way, but I knew the second I laid the knife upon the coffee table that it would pay for its trouble. I cut her in 8 places, an even number so she could rest in peace, saving the killing blow until the moment her face was the perfect contortion of distress. It seemed like an awful mess to leave for the cats, but I heard they take care of that sort of thing in time. Last night her face is still on my wall. And it's still smiling. The police arrived faster than I thought they would. That's the problem with apartments, thin walls. Always some nosy neighbor poking their nose into something that isn't their business. I supposed I should have hid the body. It's not a matter of legal repercussions, they questioned me, but didn't have any evidence in my direction. It's just that when they found the body it was doubtlessly sent to a funeral home. There they would modify the face into a more comfortable site for her open casket, which I can't imagine why a woman of her appearance would have requested before her demise. Her body was out of my hands now, and her face was still smiling. My mask, however, remained locked in its grisly scream. I don't know how long I have, but it seems like Elaine and the driver both terminated within a few days of their masks appearing. I had to act fast. I tried to make another plastic mask to match my own, but my damn hands kept shaking. That's what happens when you mess up your routine, things begin to fall apart. I couldn't get even a passable likeness of myself. The only remaining option, one I had considered, but pushed to the back of my brain as a last resort, now stood stark and alone. I took the plastic mask of my face and tossed it in the rubbish bin. Now a few shots of gin to numb the pain, now a deep breath. And in goes the knife. Skin doesn't peel back from a face nearly as cleanly as I expected. I kept getting the depth wrong, either too shallow, and only nicking myself, or too deep and cutting the underlying muscle. It took nearly 3 hours before I had removed my entire face and was able to pin the bloody mess to my bedroom wall. But skin is so much easier to adjust than plastic, and would you look at that? In no time, it was smiling. I looked over to the landlady's face, and my heart beamed with satisfaction to see her twisted terror finally appearing. One lived while the other dies. One comedy while the other tragedy, but it is the actor who decides which to wear. The end. Next story. The psychopath in my house. There's a psychopath in my house. No, he didn't break in. He sleeps in the same room as me. It's not my brother's fault, this is just who he is. If it's anyone's fault, it's my parents. My mom left when I was 6 and my little brother was 4. She never wanted us, or at least that's what my dad said, because I don't remember her very well. Dad said she used to be a perfect student with big dreams, then she got knocked up and had to drop out of college to take care of us. He reminds us all the time that it was our fault she left, and how happy he was before we were born. That's the nice version of what he said anyway. Lots of stuff about her being an ungrateful slut who'll burn in hell, but I don't think of her that way. If I was married to someone like my dad, I would have run away too. My dad needed medicine to cope with her leaving. Every time he took it, he would be gone for a few days. It would be just me and my little brother in the house, and I took care of him the best I could. My dad wouldn't usually leave us with any money, but I got pretty good at hiding things under my dress at the grocery store. I thought things would change when I was 12 and found a paper bag with $1,000 in our backyard. I thought Mom had sent it, that she'd heard about how hard things were and mailed us some money. I could usually find food when I needed it badly enough, so I didn't want to waste it on things like that. It was my brother's 10th birthday coming up, and that seemed like a big deal. I hired a van and brought him and 7 kids from his class to spend the whole day at SeaWorld. It was so much fun I thought about never going back. My brother didn't want to run away though, and I couldn't leave him. Besides, the van driver was keeping an eye on us and said he had to bring us home or he might get fired. We should have run away though. The money hadn't come from my mom, she'd forgotten about us. That's when I found out my dad's medicine was meth, and that he'd been selling some to his friends when he dropped the money by mistake. I tried to tell him that it was my fault, but since it got spent on my brother's birthday, he got the worst of it. My brother didn't walk again for 2 years after that. He needed even more help now that he was in a wheelchair. There were more bills that weren't being paid, the electricity, the gas, even the rent sometimes. I had to be out a lot trying to find money, sometimes for days at a time when I was staking out a house to steal from. I couldn't leave my brother alone too long though. My dad would just ignore him, and if I didn't check in at least twice a day then I'd find my brother sitting in his own piss and shit. I think he could have made it to the toilet by himself if he really tried, but he just gave up caring about everything. There's one thing my brother started doing to pass the time though, although this I wish he hadn't. I noticed his growing collection of small animal skulls for a while, but I assumed they were just plastic until I saw how he was catching them. I watched him put bird seed in a 2L soda bottle with the opening cut wider. Once a squirrel crawled in, he would pull a string which slid the bottle down to cover the opening with a piece of cardboard. It would struggle frantically to get out, but when it was near the opening, its own weight would hold the bottle into place against the board. I would have congratulated him on his contraption except for what happened next. He picked up the bottle, cardboard still covering the opening, and slipped a couple razor blades inside. Then he shook the whole thing until it looked like the inside of a blender, the squirrel screaming the whole time. I took it away from him, but he just kept building little things like that. It wasn't just squirrels either, mice, small birds, even a raccoon once. After he'd killed them, he'd bite the head straight off and then spit it into a bowl of water to clean the organic matter off the skull. Please stop. God didn't make those animals just so you could torture them. I said to him. Then why did he make it so much fun? It's not just animals anymore. I found a big cardboard box out on the sidewalk near the bus stop. Inside was a bag of M&Ms, a couple comic books, and his old Game Boy Color. There was a rope tied to little hooks inside the box which led toward my house. If someone were to pull that rope, the box would close and the whole thing would be dragged down the sidewalk. I don't think he'd be strong enough to pull anyone bigger than a 6-year-old, but the school bus stopped here. I ripped the box into pieces and ran to confront him. I found him sitting on his bed. He was out of the wheelchair now, waiting with a knife in his hands. "What the hell are you trying to do?" "Set a trap. It's not going to work," I said. "Don't worry. It'll work. I destroyed it." "Why are you trying to trap some kid?" "I'm not. I'm trying to trap you. That's when I noticed that the TV was suspended with ropes above me. He cut the cord, and it landed right on top of my head. He must have counted on that knocking me out because he was already coming at me with the knife. I was dizzy, but I managed to scramble out of the way and slam the door in his face. After that, I was too scared to go back inside the house. I called Child Protective Services and reported the meth deals my dad was doing in the home. I didn't mention what my brother has been doing, because I thought once he was out of here he'd have a chance at a fresh start. I didn't want his life to be over before it had even begun. We were both put into separate foster homes, and it's been 2 years since I've heard anything from him. That was until last night. My adoptive parents, wonderful Asian couple who couldn't have kids of their own, sat down with me at the kitchen table. They told me they had some good news. They were going to adopt my brother as well. I guess the family that took him and suffered an unfortunate accident. They didn't tell me what happened, but by the look they gave each other, it must have been gruesome. I hope he's changed. Telling people what he did will stop him from being adopted and ruin his life forever. I can't say anything until I've seen him again. If he hasn't though, well, that's why I'm writing this. If he hasn't changed, then at least someone will know what happened, and have a shot at stopping it from happening again. The end. Next story. A Small Taste of the Old Country. Jonathan Mayberry. Part 1. Campanduch Jardinerio Cantina, El Chalten Village, Santa Cruz, Argentina, October 31st, 1948. Would you gentlemen like something fresh from the oven? The two men seated at a small table by the window looked up with wary eyes. The question had been asked by a very old man with a face that seemed to be composed entirely of nose and wrinkles from which small, bright blue eyes twinkled. He held a wicker basket with a red cloth folded over the heaped contents. "No," said the older of the two seated men. He was about 40 and had very black hair. His mouth was a hard horizontal slash bracketed by curved lines. Laugh lines, perhaps, though he was not smiling at the moment. We did not order anything. His Spanish was rough and awkward, fitted badly around a thick foreign accent he had difficulty trying to disguise. "I'm sure you will both enjoy what I have." The intruder nudged the basket an inch closer. The rest of the cantina was quiet. A few clusters of men bent close for discreet conversation over tall glasses of beer. There was no laughter in the place. No music. No one who entered did so with a happy laugh or with a boisterous call to a friend. There was a large fire in the hearth because the temperature had dipped during the cloudy day, and stiff winds blew inland across the Falkland Current. The second man at the table was a young bull with blonde hair and huge shoulders. Does the landlord know that you're peddling your crap here? Sir, said the old man, I am a baker, and the landlord is a regular customer. The black-haired man leaned a couple of inches toward the basket, then cut a look at his friend. Did you smell this? Smell what? Said the younger man, whose chair was set on the far corner of the small table. Encouraged by the expression on the black-haired man's face, the baker said, I have something here that you might enjoy, my friends. I doubt that. May I show you? Asked the baker, his smile obsequious but earnest. I can guarantee you both that this is something you cannot get here. Not even in the houses of your friends who understand such things. Alas, no. The recipe is an old family one and is, perhaps, too regional and specific to be popular among the locals here. It is something that you probably thought you would never smell or see again, and certainly never taste again. Not truly. Not, if I may be allowed a liberty, authentically. Oh, very well, grumbled the blonde. Show us and be done with it. The intruder bowed, plucked a corner of the cloth, and folded it back with great ceremony to reveal small loaves of dark bread. Steam rose in soft curls, and a delicious aroma filled the air. The black-haired man smiled and let out a long, soft breath. His friend's eyes widened. Schwarzbrot. Indeed, my friends, said the baker. I'm delighted you've heard of it, even here in Argentina. Yes, Schwarzbrot it is. And it is a German recipe for it, handed down from my grandmother's grandmother. With some Austrian touches, of course. The very best wheat and rye blended with caraway, anise, fennel, just a little coriander. And, of course, a touch here and there of allspice, fenugreek, sweet trefoil, celery seeds, and cardamom. I grind each of the spices by hand and then grind them again together and mix them into the dough. Everything is done the old way. Everything is done right, because such things deserve precision, do you agree? The men nodded absently, their eyes fixed on the hot bread. They both swallowed over and over again as their mouths watered. Baking is a tradition as worthy as any other, continued the baker. In Austria and Germany each family of bakers guards its own recipes for making Schwarzbrot jealously. Go on, my friends, try them. The men exchanged a brief look and a briefer shared nod, and then they each took a loaf of the black bread. They sniffed and then took tentative bites. The baker watched their eyes, saw the eyelids flutter, and he smiled as the men chewed, swallowed, and took larger bites. Mein Gott, murmured the black-haired man. This is heaven. This is pure heaven. I'd never thought. He stopped, shook his head, and took a third bite, leaving only a nub pinched between his thumb and forefinger. The young blond man ate the entire loaf without comment and then eyed the basket. How much for another? The baker smiled and placed it on the table. Consider these a gift. It is a great pleasure to know that you not only enjoy them but also truly appreciate them. So, please, enjoy a small taste of the old country. Each man snatched seconds from the basket and bit into them. After a few moments of undisguised gustatory lust, the black-haired man looked up, his jaw muscles bunching and flexing as he chewed. Which old country would that be, exactly? We are Argentinians. Santa Cruz is our home. We are from here. Of course, agreed the baker, returning the nod and adding a small wink. We are all clearly Argentinian. Yes, said the black-haired man. Yes, said the blonde. I have never been out of the country. Born and bred here. Of course, agreed the baker. They all smiled at one another. When the two younger men finished their loaves and explored the basket, they found it empty, and their faces fell. I have more in my shop, the baker said quickly. It's near here, on a side street off the square. Becker's Breads and Baked Goods. And you are Becker? Joseph Becker, sir, said the old man. And you gentlemen are? The black-haired man said, I'm Roberto Santiago, and this is Eduardo Gomez. Becker looked amused. Santiago and Gomez? Of course. Santiago eyed him. Your name is not Spanish. Are you Dutch engineer? No, said Becker, I am not a descendant of immigrants, as I imagine you are. Sure, said Gomez without conviction. That is what we are. My great-grandmother was born in Berlin but married an Austrian, and I was born in Hallstatt, which is in Austria, said Becker. Perhaps you have heard of it. Such a lovely place in the Salzkammergut, located on the southwestern shore of a lake. Those of us from Hallstatt, there is great pride in who we are, in what we are, and what we have endured. I have never heard of Hallstatt, said Gomez in a guarded tone. Have you not? Said Becker, looking sad. We are Argentinian, insisted Santiago. His eyes were hooded. Of course, Becker soothed. As there's so many here in Santa Cruz, and in Buenos Aires, Misiones, La Pampa, Chubut, and 100 small villages. The men said nothing. We are all Argentinians because it is such a lovely place, continued Becker amiably. A lovely and very safe place to be. The brisk and breezy nights, the tequila, Santiago and Gomez sat very tense, very attentive, and their eyes were hard as fists. Becker gave them an understanding nod and the slightest suggestion of a wink. It is a very large world, my friends, and even here in lovely Santa Cruz we can all sometimes feel very far from home. I know I do. You talk a lot, said Santiago. I'm old, said the baker with a shrug, and old men like to talk. It reminds us that we are still alive. And, well, the world has emptied itself of so many people that I knew that I often have only my own voice for company. So, yes, I talk. I rattle and prattle, and I can see that I try your patience. Why, after all, would men as young and healthy as you, my friends, care to waste time listening to the babblings of an old man? That question has occurred to me, said Santiago. I am utterly fascinated to know why you feel that it is appropriate to interrupt a private conversation. Gomez turned away to hide a smile. The little baker was unperturbed. I take such a liberty, my friends, because tonight is the second day of Seelenwoche. All Souls Week. Do you know of it? Gomez began to answer, but Santiago stopped him with a light touch on the arm. No, said Santiago, we don't know what that is. Of course not. It is an Austrian holiday, and you have never been to my country, as you have said. Let me explain. In Austria we do not celebrate Halloween, as the Americans and Irish do. For us, this holiday is about reflection, about praying for those who have been taken from us, for making offerings to the spirits of our beloved dead. And we all lost so many people during the war. Gomez kept his gaze locked on Becker, but Santiago looked down at his hands. The war is over, said Santiago softly. Is a war ever truly over if people are alive who remember it, asked Becker mildly. Can it be over if people are alive who remember the world before the war and can count the number of people and things they have lost? Family members, cities, friends, dreams, promises. The corner of the room was very quiet now. Becker pulled out a chair and perched on it. Seelenwosch was never a time of celebration, and now that the war has run its course we are left to tally the costs. We honor our dead not only by remembering them but by recalling what they stood for, and what they died for. Santiago nodded and lifted his beer glass. He stared moodily into it, nodded again, took a long swallow, and placed it very carefully back on the table. "Why do you talk of such things?" asked Santiago. "Because it was always a custom of my family to celebrate Seelenwosch. My family was very, dedicated to custom and tradition." "Was?" asked Gomez. "Was." The two younger men looked at him, and although they did not ask specific questions, Becker nodded as if they had. Answering in the way that many of the pale-skinned residents of Santa Cruz did these last few years. Becker touched the curved handle of his wicker basket. "We love our dead. Their having died does not make them less a part of our family. We can see the holes carved in the world and the shapes of each one of them. You understand this?" The men nodded. "We believe that during Seelenwosch," said Becker, "the spirits of our loved ones come and sit beside us at our lonely tables. We know that the dead suffer. We know that they linger in the world between worlds, because the Church tells us that all souls are in purgatory awaiting judgment. The priests tell us that only the perfectly pure are then raised to heaven, but the rest must wait for their sins to be judged and their fates decided. It is what all souls must endure, for, after all, was anyone ever without sin? Jesus, perhaps, but who else? No one, according to the priests with whom I have spoken." The men offered no comment, nor did they chase Becker away. "The priests say that when Judgment Day comes, then the souls of all the dead will be either raised up or cast into the pit. Until then, they linger and linger. So it is up to those of us here on earth to care for them, to remember them, to pray that their sins be forgiven, to offer what comforts we can. That is why we have this holiday. It reminds us to remember them. And to remember that they remember being alive. They may be dead and may have no earthly bodies that we can see except when the veils between worlds are thin, as they are this week, but they feel everything. Hunger and thirst, joy and despair, ecstasy and pain. And fear. Yes, my friends, they know fear very well. During Seelenwosch we leave bread to ease their hunger and water to soothe their thirst. We light lanterns so that the dead know they are welcome in our homes and, for a week at least, not be so alone, and so that they will not be afraid of the dark. These are good customs because they remind us of our own compassion, and of our better qualities, mercy among the rest. And that is why we have traditions, is it not? So that we remember what is important to remember. That is why we go to church so often during that week. We go to pray for the dead and to beg God to call them home to heaven. Santiago began to speak, but Gomez touched his arm. The young blond man gave Becker a fierce and ugly look. Perhaps it is in your best interest to go away now. No, please, a moment more, begged the baker. I did not come here to tell ghost stories and spoil your evening. Yet that is what you are doing, growled Gomez. I said all of that in order to say this, Becker said brightly. I opened my little bakery here in order to preserve more than the recipes of my family. I opened it to celebrate who I am and where I come from. After all, I may live the life of an exile here, but I am Austrian, now and forever. Surely you can appreciate that, even though there are tensions growing between my country and yours now that the war is over. For a while there it seemed as if we would become one country, one people, our old differences forgotten as we all marched together under a shared flag. He paused and laughed. Of course I say this as if you are German, which of course you are not. Forgive me. It's just that I feel that men of the world such as you would understand that when I speak of the old country, I mean the land I left behind and the one from which your, ancestors must surely have come. For although you are clearly not European, you could pass for Germans quite easily. Santiago said, it's possible there is German blood somewhere in our family trees. Gomez said nothing. So, said Becker, in the unlikely event that you might be interested in tasting more of my family's recipes, why not come by my shop tomorrow night? I would be happy to make you a traditional dinner with all of the delicacies for which we Beckers are, or rather were, famous. Gomez cocked his head to one side. Like what? I mean, I have, heard of your cuisine because of the number of Austrian and German expats living here, but have never tasted any. How sad, said Becker, then he brightened. Well, my friends, I would be delighted, indeed honored, to introduce you to Tafelspitz, which is lean beef broiled in broth and served with a sauce of apples, horseradish, and chives. Or, if you prefer, there is goulash, which is a lovely hot pot that should best be eaten with semmelmadel, a dumpling of which my mother was rightly proud. Gomez closed his eyes for a moment and breathed slowly through his nose. Santiago must have kicked him under the table because the younger man's eyes snapped open and he cleared his throat. You describe it so well, he said awkwardly, that I can almost taste it, even though I am completely unfamiliar with them. Of course, these names must be quite foreign to you, said Becker, giving him a small wink. Let me enchant you further. If you come to dinner, you can try Selchfleisch with sauerkraut and dumplings. And for after you can try my aunt's recipe for Marillenknödel, a pastry filled with apricots and Mirabelle plums. The dumplings are boiled in lightly salted water, then covered in crisply fried bread crumbs and powdered sugar, and baked in a potato dough. Gott im Himmel, murmured Gomez, and again Santiago kicked him under the table. This time, however, Gomez shook his head, and to Becker he said, You're killing me. Will you come? Asked Becker eagerly. Will you allow me the great honor of making such a meal for men who, I have no doubt at all, will truly appreciate it? Here, in this town, I am a simple baker. Most of my day is spent making local goods. Aljafor and chocatorta and, God help me, tortas fritas. That's what my customers want, and because I need to make a living, it is what I sell. But it is not who I am. It is not the food that I understand, and I cannot sell Austrian goods to the public. Not even here. Not openly, anyway. That would present so many problems, and, unlike you gentlemen, I have no papers that say I was born here. Everyone knows that I am Austrian, although to hostile and suspicious eyes, I am German, and these days everyone hates the Germans. Gomez turned and spat onto the floor. Argentina is a haven in name but not in fact, said Becker, lowering his voice. People are looking for Germans. For certain kinds of Germans. No, you do not need to say anything because I know you are men of the world and understand such things. My point, and I admit that like all old men, I wander around before I approach the kernel of what I mean to say, is that I need to be a good German if I am to live safely. That means letting go of so much of my culture. To abandon it and forswear it and pretend that it never mattered to me at all. Becker paused and dabbed at the corner of his eye, studied the moisture on his fingertips, and wiped it off on his shirt. I have had to become a stranger to the man I used to be, he said. So much so that my family, were any of them still alive, would not know me were it not for the things I prepare in secret. For me. For them. That is why I ask you fine gentlemen to come to my shop after it is closed and share a feast in celebration of Seelenwusch, to remember all of those who we loved and who died in the war. Will you grant me that kindness? Will you tolerate further the company of a talkative and sad old man who wants nothing more than to offer that taste of home? Of my homeland? Can I entice you? Will you taste what I so eagerly want to prepare for you? It took a long time for either of the men across the table from him to answer. Eventually, though, Santiago croaked a single word. Yes. Part 2. Becker's Famosa Panaderia, El Chaltén Village, Santa Cruz, Argentina, November 1, 1948. The knock was discreet, and Joseph Becker answered it at once. He opened the door, stepped past the two tall men, and looked quickly up and down the crooked street. There were no street lights, but cold moonlight painted the cobblestones in shades of silver and blue. A dog barked off in the distance, and a toucan, very far from his jungle home, sat on the eave of the shuttered jewelers across the street. There were no people at all, though the chilly breeze brought the sound of laughter from some distant party in a house around the corner. "Come in, my friends," said Becker, and he patted the backs of the men as they passed through into the bakery. When they were all inside, Becker pulled the door shut and locked it with a double turn of a heavy key. The shop was small, but the space had been used with care. There was a long glass-fronted counter in which were set square platters of baked goods. There were small cakes dusted with powdered sugar, round chocolate double-wafer cakes, cornstarch biscuits covered with coconut, glistening cubes of quince, vanilla sponge cake ladyfingers, and many other delicacies particular to Argentina. There were French and Italian cakes and sweets, too, and even some pastries of American invention. But what dominated the store were the breads. So many of them. Ajdov Kru, the Slovenia bread made from buckwheat flour and potato, dark Russian sourdough and crisp Japanese melon pan made from dough covered in a thin layer of crispy cookie dough, machetta from Italy and taftan from Iran, and dozens of others from dozens of places, including a whole tray of sugary pan de muerto. And, of course, central to all were the breads from Austria and Germany. The light Brachen wheat rolls, whole grain rye Vollkornbrot, dry cornbrot rich in wheat, oats, and rye, 5-seed Fünfkornbrot. Even thick, dark salted bretzels. The two guests stood staring through the glass, eyes wide, lips parted with obvious hunger. "Gentlemen," said Becker, beaming with pride, "I can say without fear of contradiction that there is no finer selection of baked goods to be found anywhere in Santa Cruz. Anywhere in this entire godforsaken country," breathed Santiago. Becker chuckled. "Pride is a sin, they say, but if so, I will accept whatever punishment is awarded me, for I am very proud." Gomez kept licking his lips like a child. "May I?" he began, then stopped and gave Becker a quick look. "Are these for sale?" "Nothing here is for sale," said Becker, then laughed aloud at the crestfallen looks on his guests' faces. "I am only teasing." nothing is for sale to you because you are my guests. Which means that everything you see is yours for the asking. Come, come, we will eat dinner and then have some wine and conversation, and when you go, I will overburden you with bags and bundles of goodies to take back to your home. Come, gentlemen, come into the parlor and let us sit. Still chuckling, Becker passed between the folds of a drapery hung over a doorway and waved for the two men to follow. They did, and within minutes they were all seated at a large wooden table set near a crackling fire. A fine linen cloth had been placed upon the table, and places set at each chair. Santiago frowned across the table at 3 additional settings. "Are we expecting others?" he asked. Murmured Becker, then he smiled. "Ah, remember that this is Seelenwosch, my friend. I have set an extra place for each of us so that we can offer food and drink for those we have lost and perhaps bring them here to share our feast and be warmed by the fire and by our company." Santiago looked uneasy, but he nodded. Gomez briefly looked down at his empty place. "Would you gentlemen prefer a local red wine or something from my country?" Becker leaned on the word my, and it brought the two men to attention. "What do you have?" asked Gomez. "Yes," agreed Santiago, "if it is from your country, I would be interested to take a taste and judge it." "How delightful," said Becker, springing up and fetching a heavy bottle from a large terracotta wine cooler. He uncorked it and filled all 6 of the glasses on the table, then uncorked a second and third bottle and set them close by. "This is a Riesling from the Wachau region of Austria. You will notice, perhaps, just a hint of white pepper." "This will do very well," said the black-haired man after a sip. "What shall we toast?" asked the baker. "Or, may I suggest something?" "It's your house," said Santiago. "The first toast is yours." "Most gracious," said Becker. He raised his glass and said, "Genieß das Leben ständig. Du bist länger tot als lebendig. Always enjoy life. You are dead longer than you are alive." His guests paused for a moment, then they nodded and drank. After the glasses had been refilled, Becker vanished into the kitchen and returned with the first of what proved to be many courses. Not only had he prepared the delicacies with which he had tempted the men to join him, but he had gone further and set dish after dish on the table. More than any 3 men could hope to eat. More than a dozen men could manage. With each course, the baker served his guests first and then placed small portions of every dish on the plates set aside in honor of the dead. Soon those untouched plates were heaped high with slices of rare meats, with strong cheeses and steaming vegetables, and bowls of soups and stews were set in place beside the plates. Gomez picked up his fork and then frowned. "Excuse me, but I do not have a knife." "Do you not know the custom?" asked Becker, raising his eyebrows. "On Seelenwosch many people hide their knives so as not to tempt evil spirits to acts of mischief. Granted, that is usually only done on Halloween night, but in my town we hid the knives all week." He sighed. "Strange, though, how mischief found us regardless." After only a brief pause the guests attacked their food, and soon thoughts of knives were gone. As promised, the slices of roast beef and boiled pork and baked chicken were so rich and tender that their forks easily cut through the flesh. The men devoured the food, often in long periods where there was no conversation and the only sounds were that of chewing and crunching, swallowing and sipping, of forks sliding along plates and spoons scraping along the rims of soup bowls. And throughout there were gasps of delight and sighs of contentment. bottles of wine were opened and emptied. The faces of the three men grew flushed, and their eyes took on a glaze as bright as that on the cooked hams. It was only when the feast began slowing that conversation began. At first it was questions about ingredients and origins of the recipes. Becker told them about how one aunt would prepare a dish and how a cousin would do it differently but equally well. He spoke of town fairs and Christmas feasts and wedding banquets and funeral luncheons and the menus appropriate to each. Then, as he refilled their glasses once more, he sat back and said more wistfully, "But that is all what was, not what is, my friends. We speak of ghosts, do we not?" "Ghosts?" inquired Gomez, his mouth filled with a large bite of a schnitzel that was so spicy that sweat beaded his upper lip and forehead and glistened along his hairline. "Surely," said Becker. "The ghosts of everyone who created the recipes on which we dine. None of them are my own, of course, but were crafted by members of my family. Sisters and aunts, cousins and nephews, and my dear mother and grandmother. Even my father was a veritable demon in the kitchen. The Schweineschnitzel you seem to be enjoying so much was his personal recipe. It was as if he stood beside me in spirit as I prepared it, as if the ghosts of everyone I loved were with me in my kitchen, guiding my hand. I often feel them with me, though perhaps because of the holiday, I feel them more acutely this week. And I have no doubt they each added a touch of this and that when I was not looking." Gomez swallowed and picked up his glass, sloshing a little of the wine as he did so. "Then let us drink." "Ja," said Santiago, "zum Wohl." "Zum Wohl," growled Gomez, and Becker echoed it as they all raised their glasses in the direction of the empty side of the table, and downed the wine to the last drop. Becker filled the glasses again. Santiago stared at the plates of uneaten food across from him, and he slouched back in his chair, chin down on his chest. "What happened to them?" he asked. "To your family, I mean." The baker sighed. "They died during the war." Gomez frowned. "In Hallstatt? I did not know that city had been bombed." "Oh, none of them died from bombs," said Becker as he pushed back his chair and stood. "Let me clear away." Gomez looked down in dismay at his plate and seemed surprised that the heap of food was gone. "Time for something very special," said Becker as he stacked the plates and set them on a sideboard. "I hope you saved room." "A little room, at least." Santiago discreetly unbuttoned the top of his trousers to ease the pressure on his swollen stomach, while Gomez looked eager to start the whole feast again. Becker vanished into the kitchen and returned a few moments later bearing a small silver tray on which was a pyramid of small cakes. They were each round and about a quarter-inch thick. Pale, with a hint of gold baked in around the edges, and each was marked by the indentation of a cross cut across their surface. Steam rose from them as if they had come straight from the oven, and the smell was wonderful, enchanting, hinting at nutmeg and cinnamon and allspice. "Every village has its own recipes for sole cakes or sole bread," said Becker as he placed the tray in the exact center of the table. "Some prefer to bake loaves of it, while others make cookies. My mother's recipe was for little cakes like these. Crisp at the edges but soft as butter in the middle and light as a whisper on the tongue." The two guests stared hungrily at the pile of cakes. "I remember so many times helping my mother as she baked 100 weight of sole cakes to give to the poor children who came knocking at our door all through Seelenwosch. You see the crosses on each? That means they are alms, and are therefore righteous gifts given freely to any who ask. That was so like my mother," she would open the door at anyone's knock and welcome them inside. She could not bear the thought of turning someone away hungry, especially when we, as bakers and cooks, always had enough. Becker placed his fingertips on his chest over his heart the way some people did when touching crosses, but he wore no jewelry of any kind. We were luckier than most, for we never knew hunger. We knew of it, of course. We were all aware of the horrors of hunger, of want, of unbearable need. Of having no place and being unwelcome and having doors closed to us. So when my ancestors settled in Hallstatt and opened the doors of our bakery, how could any of us turn away someone who came to us asking for something to eat? A crust of bread is nothing to those who have so much, but it can feed a starving child or keep a man alive to work another day in hopes of providing for those he loves. These cakes? They might be all that a starving child might eat that day. How could anyone with a beating heart turn a deaf ear to the knock, however weak and tentative? "Good for you," said Santiago. "No, not good for me," said Becker. "Good for my mother. She was the kind heart of my family. She was like her mother, and her sisters were like her. Kind and generous, in part because it was their nature and in part because they remembered hunger and want." "These cakes smell delicious," said Gomez. "Do they? My mother would be pleased that you think so." "Then let us each have one in honor of her," suggested the big blond man. "Of course, my friend, of course." Becker leaned across the table and picked up a cake, careful not to crumble the delicate crust between his fingers. He set it on a small plate and placed it in front of Gomez. He repeated the action for Santiago. Then he took one for himself and sat down. Santiago nodded toward the empty side of the table. "Aren't you forgetting something?" Becker glanced at the untouched plates of food. "Ah. So courteous. But, no, my friend, soul cakes are for the living." "Oh," said Santiago, clearly not following. "One more thing," said Becker as the other men began reaching for their cakes. "A last bit of seasonal ceremony, if you'll indulge me. I like to follow the traditions in form as well as spirit." He crossed to a cabinet and removed a small lantern, checked that it was filled with oil, and brought it to the table. "Do either of you have a match?" Gomez produced a lucifer match from a pocket, scraped it alight on the heel of his shoe, and leaned the flame across to Becker. The old man's eyes twinkled with blue fire as he guided Gomez's hand toward the lantern wick. The flame seemed to leap from match to wick, and at the same moment Gomez twitched with a deep shiver. "What's wrong with you?" asked Santiago. Nothing," said Gomez. "Just a chill. It's gone now." Becker adjusted the flame and placed the lantern on the table close to the untouched plates of food. "So the souls of the dead can find their way here to join our feast." "Forgive me, Herr Becker," said Santiago, his faux Spanish fading in favor of cosmopolitan German, "but isn't that a bit ghoulish?" "Do you think so?" asked Becker, looking surprised. "How perceptive." "What?" "Nothing. A joke." Becker refilled their glasses with the last of the final bottle of Riesling. He placed his palms flat on the table and let out a long, satisfied sigh. "Now, my friends," he said, also speaking German, "before we partake, let me tell you something of these cakes. There is magic in baking. A special sorcery that can transport us to other places and times with a single bite. That is why I invited you both here." "What do you mean?" asked Santiago. "Why us? Because you are no more Argentinian than I am, nor even Deutsch-Argentinier. You are sons of Germany, as I am a son of Austria. No, please don't deny it. We are all friends here. We are safe and alone here, and we may be who we are. There are no spies here. No Americans or British. No hunters from the new state of Israel. We have nothing to fear from each other, and that allows us to take a breath, to be real, to be ourselves. And what if we are German? Asked Santiago, his tone dangerous, his eyes cold. Then I am among countrymen, said Becker. I invited you here to share my holiday feast because I knew that you would appreciate it as only sons of the fatherland could. How do we know you are not a Jew? Demanded Gomez. Because I have eaten pork with you, said Becker. And beef with cream sauce. Because I say that I am not a Jew. Because if I was a Jew, there would have been a dozen armed men waiting for you in here and not a feast and good wine and hospitality. He's not a Jew, said Santiago. No, agreed Becker. I am a baker from Austria, and my family has lived in Hallstatt for generations. He touched the surface of the soul cake on his plate. I asked you here to share in this special and sacred celebration. To break bread with me, to feast with me and the spirits of my family because I am alone and lonely, and I knew you would understand. Neither of you has families here, either. No, said Santiago. Mine were killed in Dresden. Gott's Willen, blurted Gomez, but Santiago shook his head. Enough, Erhard, said Santiago. He is right. We are alone here. We are safe here, if nowhere else. Santiago turned to Becker. My name is Heinrich Gebler, and this is Erhard Bohm, and we are happy to share this table with you. God! How good it is to be myself, even for a moment. Gomez, Bohm, cursed and slapped the table hard enough to make the wine and all of the glasses dance. Then be damned to all of us. Yes, I am Erhard Bohm. There, I said it. Are we all happy now? Very happy, said Becker. And I thank you for your trust. Believe me when I say that it is a secret that I will take with me to the grave. You had better, warned Gebler. We are taking a great risk. Now, can we eat these damned cakes? Asked Bohm. Wait, pleaded Becker. Everything must be done exactly right, as I have said. To eat a soul cake is a very serious matter, especially in such a moment as this. After all, we have each seen our world burn. We have each lost so many of those we loved during the war, have we not? The two Germans nodded. Then should we not honor the dead by inviting them to join us at this table? Sure, said Bohm, invite Hitler and Himmler and Göring, for all that I care. The dead are dead and I am hungry. The dead are dead but they are hungry, too, Herr Bohm, said Becker. I have lit the lantern so that they can find us, and I have prepared food for them, because the dead are always hungry. Always. You're being ghoulish again, muttered Gebler. Perhaps. He gestured to the cakes. Did you know that the moment grain is milled it's possessed of its greatest life-giving potential? The dough for the soul cakes must be made when the flour is fresh and alive. It must contain life in order to be worth consuming. I don't follow, said Bohm. You will, said Becker. Now, please, try the soul cakes. The Germans shared another glance, then shrugged and picked up the cakes. They each took small tentative bites. This is delicious, said Bohm. I've never tasted anything so good, said Gebler. How delightful, cried Becker, clapping his hands. Have another. Have as many as you like. Bohm pulled the tray over and pawed 4 more of the cakes onto his plate, then offered what was left to Gebler. Despite the heavy meal, they ate with relish, their faces dusted with sugar and crumbs falling onto their shirts. While they ate, Becker spoke quietly of the holiday. During Seelenwosch, he said, the souls are released from their graves, and they wander the earth as hungry ghosts. Lanterns like this invite them to dine with us in the hopes that they can feast well enough to ease their hunger and gain a measure of peace. So you keep saying, said Gebler, pausing with a fresh cake an inch from his mouth, but quite frankly, Herr Becker, I am not a very good Catholic. I never was, and less so since the world fell apart. Everything that I cared about burned down. The damned Russians and British and Americans have taken it all from us. Our hopes and dreams and every single thing of worth that we owned. We are the ghosts haunting a world in which we no longer truly live. Becker nodded. To be equally frank, Herr Gebler, I am not a very good Catholic, either. But not a Jew? Asked Bohm, his cheeks bulging with soul cake. Not a Jew. Then if you're not Catholic, asked Gebler, why do you go to such lengths to follow these rituals? Because I am a kind of Catholic, said Becker. My people tend to adopt the customs of wherever we live. It is how we survived all these years. Well, how we once survived. Clearly, we did not blend in well enough. They still came for us and rounded us up and took us away. It's not really something that can be blamed on the war, though. My sisters and brothers, uncles and aunts, cousins, they all died far from the battlefields. I doubt they ever heard a shot fired or saw a bomb fall. The 2 Germans suddenly paused in the act of chewing and looked at him with sudden suspicion. What does that mean? Demanded Gebler quietly. It means that I am not a Jew or a homosexual or a Pole or a Slav or any of those groups, nor were any of my family, and yet they all died in the camps. In Bergen-Belsen and Sachsenhausen, in Buchenwald and Dachau, in Mauthausen and Ravensbrück. He leaned slightly forward and smiled a sad little smile. I am Romany. A damn gypsy. Bohm spat the half-chewed cake onto the table. This is a trap. He's poisoned us. Both Germans shot to their feet. No, 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 said Becker, holding his hands palms out. I would never pollute my family's recipes with poison. There is nothing hidden in the meat or bread or anything else. Did I not eat it along with you? You didn't eat the cakes, snarled Gebler. He took a threatening step toward the baker. No, but not because they are poisoned, which they are not, protested Becker, still seated, but because they were made specially for you. For tonight. They were made in celebration of Seelenwosch. This is a trap, Heinrich, said Bohm. Let's see how much of him we need to cut off before he tells us who else knows about us and, no, said Becker. You will not need to do that, Oberscharfer Bohm. Oh, don't look so surprised. Do you think I picked you at random? I came here to this town to find you and Obersturmführer Gebler. I came looking for both of you because you were at Mauthausen, where my mother and grandmother were taken. You took the gold from their teeth and cut the rings from their fingers. You worked for the commandant, Franz Zereis, and under his direction you worked them and starved them until they dropped, and you buried what was left of them in mass graves. My brothers and sisters, too. And my father. All of them. Starved to death and buried like trash. Becker's voice was soft, quiet, unhurried. So they died, sneered Gebler. So what? You Romani are trash and you have always been trash and the world is better off without you. You're worse even than the Jews. At least they never renounced their faith even when we held their children above the flames of a bonfire. You gypsies would forswear anyone and anything to try to survive. Your mother probably offered to spread her legs for us and maybe did. Maybe she did, said Becker. Maybe she begged and maybe she said that she renounced her faith, her culture, her people. What else could she say? Why would she, or any of them, not try anything in order to survive? What is a proclamation of renouncement except words? How is that more ignoble than slaughtering innocent people by the hundreds of thousands? By the millions? His tone never rose beyond that of mild conversation, and he wore a constant smile of contentment. We'll see what you are willing to promise, said Bohm, reaching for a serving fork with 2 long tines. No, said Becker. We won't. Or, rather, it won't matter. Nothing you can do to me will matter at all. Not now. Not anymore. Bohm and Gebler glanced toward the windows and doors. Don't worry, said Becker, no authorities are coming. Argentina doesn't care who or what you are or what you did. That's why so many Nazis came here. It was a safe haven. However, safety is a funny word. It is conditional on assumptions about how the world works. You're babbling, said Gebler. No, said Becker, I'm explaining. The assumption is that you are politically safe, and you are. The assumption is that you cannot be extradited, and you can't be. The assumption is that no earthly power is likely to harm you here, and that is almost certainly correct. Then what the hell is this all about? Demanded Gebler. The fault in the assumption, said Becker, is that I have any interest in relying on earthly powers to punish you. I don't. I have no faith at all in governments and agencies and courts. Bohm pointed the fork at him. Talk plain or, shoo, said Becker. Stop for a moment and think about where you are and what I have said. Think about the time of year. The German stared at him. My lantern is not very bright, said Becker, but it is bright enough. Oh yes, it is bright enough for the spirits of my beloved dead to follow, even though their bones are buried on the other side of the world. What is distance to ghosts? The lantern flame suddenly danced as if whipped by a breeze, but all the windows were closed. It threw strange shadows on the wall. Becker smiled. I have been a good host, said the baker. I have prepared the very best dishes from the recipes of my family, and you have fed well. Very well. Some celebrations require fatted calves, but I think fatted pigs will do nicely. Bohm shivered again, and now Gebler did, too. Their breaths plumed the air of the dining room. The flickering shadows on the wall looked strangely like silhouettes of people. Many people. Old and young, short and tall, male and female. Everywhere, all around the table. The dead are always hungry, said Becker. And you will be, for them, a small taste of the old country. He sat back, still smiling, and watched as the shadows fell upon the 2 German officers. It was a quiet street and the windows were shuttered, and if anyone heard the screams they did not come to investigate. The end.